Bedtime Stories with the Story Club for Kids. Hello, children. It's time to wind up for the day and settle down for the night. I hope all of you have brushed your teeth and are ready for bed. Now, let's begin our first bedtime story for tonight. This is the tale of Samuel Whiskers by Beatrix Potter. Once upon a time, there was an old cat called Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit, who was an anxious parent. She used to lose her kittens constantly, and whenever there were lost kittens, they were always in mischief. On baking day, she determined to shut them up in a cupboard. She caught Moppet and Mittens, but she could not find Tom. Mrs. Tabitha went up and down all over the house, mewing for Tom Kitten. She looked in the pantry, under the staircase, and she searched the best spare bedroom that was all covered up with dust sheets, but she could not find him anywhere. It was an old house, full of cupboards and passages. Some of the walls were 4 feet thick, and there used to be a strange noise inside them, as if there might be a secret little staircase. Certainly, there were odd little jagged doorways in the wainscot, and things disappeared at night, especially cheese and some other yummy food. Mrs. Tabitha became more and more distracted and mewed with fear. While her mother was searching the house, Moppet and Mittens had got into mischief again. The cupboard door was not locked, so they pushed it open and came out. They went straight to the dough, which was set to rise in a pan before the fire. They patted it with their little soft paws. "Shall we make dear little muffins?" said Mittens to Moppet. But just at that moment, somebody knocked at the front door, and Moppet jumped into the flour barrel in a fright. Mittens ran away to the dairy and hid in an empty jar on the stone shelf where the milk pans stood. The visitor was a neighbor, Mrs. Ribby. She had called to borrow some yeast for her baking. Mrs. Tabitha came downstairs mewing dreadfully. "Come in, Cousin Ribby, come in and sit you down. I'm in sad trouble, you see," said Tabitha. "I've lost my dear son Thomas. I'm afraid the rats have got him." She wiped her eyes with her apron. "He's a naughty kitten, Cousin Tabitha. He made a cat's cradle of my best bonnet last time I came to tea. Where have you looked for him?" "All over the house. The rats are too many for me." "What a thing it is to have an unruly family," said Mrs. Tabitha Twitchit. "I'm not afraid of rats. I will help you to find him and teach him a lesson too. What is all that soot in the fender?" "The chimney needs sweeping. Oh dear me, Cousin Ribby. Now Moppet and Mittens are gone. They have both got out of the cupboard." Ribby and Tabitha set to work to search the house thoroughly again. They poked under the beds with Ribby's umbrella, and they rummaged in cupboards. They even fetched a candle and looked inside a clothes chest in one of the attics. They could not find anything, but once they heard a door bang and somebody scuttered downstairs. "Yes, it is infested with rats," said Tabitha tearfully. "I caught 7 young ones out of one hole in the back kitchen, and we had them for dinner last Saturday. And once I saw the old father rat. An enormous old rat he was, Cousin Ribby. I was just going to jump upon him when he showed his yellow teeth at me and ran down the hole. The rats get upon my nerves, Cousin Ribby, said Tabitha. Ribby and Tabitha searched and searched and searched. They both heard a curious roly-poly noise under the attic floor. But there was nothing to be seen. They returned to the kitchen. "Here's one of your kittens at last," said Ribby, dragging Moppet out of the floor barrel. They shook the floor off her and set her down on the kitchen floor. She seemed to be in a terrible fright. "Oh, mother, mother," said Moppet. "There's been an old woman rat in the kitchen and she's stolen some of the dough." The two cats ran to look at the dough pan. Sure enough, there were marks of little scratching fingers and a lump of dough was gone. Which way did she go, Moppet? But Moppet had been too frightened to peep out of the barrel again. Ribby and Tabitha took her with them to keep her safely in sight while they went on with their search. They went into the dairy. The first thing they found was Mittens hiding in an empty jar. They tipped up the jar and she scrambled out. "Oh, mother, mother," said Mittens. "Oh, mother, there has been an old man rat in the dairy. A huge, big rat, mother. And he's stolen a pat of butter and the rolling pin." Ribby and Tabitha looked at one another. "A rolling pin?" said Ribby. "A rolling pin and butter? Oh my Thomas!" exclaimed Tabitha. Ribby said, "Did we not hear a roly-poly noise in the attic when we were looking into that chest?" Ribby and Tabitha rushed upstairs again. Sure enough, the roly-poly noise was still going on quite distinctly under the attic floor. "This is serious, Cousin Tabitha," said Ribby. "We must send for John Joyner at once." Now this is what had been happening to Tom Kitten all this while. Tom Kitten did not want to be shut up in a cupboard. When he saw that his mother was going to bake, he determined to hide. He looked about for a nice convenient place and he fixed upon the chimney. The fire had only just been lighted and it was not that hot, but there was a white choky smoke from the green sticks. Tom Kitten got upon the fender and looked up. It was a big old-fashioned fireplace. So there was plenty of room for a little tomcat to go up. He jumped right up into the fireplace, balancing himself upon the iron bar where the kettle hangs. Tom Kitten took another big jump off the bar and landed on a ledge high up inside the chimney, knocking down some soot into the fender. And that's the soot that Ribby and Tabitha had noticed earlier. Tom Kitten coughed and choked with the smoke, and he could hear the sticks beginning to crackle and burn in the fireplace down below. He made up his mind to climb right to the top and get out on the slates and try to catch sparrows. "I cannot go back. If I slipped, I might fall in the fire and singe my beautiful tail and my little blue jacket." Tom Kitten was getting very frightened. He climbed up and up and up. Then he waded sideways through inches of soot. He was like a little sweep himself. It was most confusing in the dark. There was less smoke, but Tom Kitten felt quite lost. He scrambled up and up. But before he reached the chimney top, he came to a place where somebody had loosened a stone in the wall. There were some bones lying about. "This seems funny," said Tom Kitten. "Who has been gnawing bones up here in the chimney? I wish I had never come here. And what a funny smell. It is something like mouse only very strong. It makes me want to sneeze, said Tom Kitten. He squeezed through the hole in the wall and dragged himself along a most uncomfortable, tight passage where there was hardly any light. He groped his way carefully for several yards. All at once, he fell head over heels in the dark, down a hole, and landed on a heap of very dirty rags. When Tom Kitten picked himself up and looked about him, he found himself in a place that he had never seen before, although he had lived all his life in the house. It was a very small, stuffy, fusty room, with boards and rafters and cobwebs. Opposite to him, as far away as he could sit, was an enormous rat. "What do you mean by fumbling and tumbling into my bed all covered with smuts?" said the rat, chattering his teeth. "Please, sir, the chimney wants sweeping," said poor Tom Kitten. "Anna Maria! Anna Maria!" squeaked the rat. There was a pattering noise and an old woman rat poked her head round a rafter. All in a minute, she rushed upon Tom Kitten, and before he knew what was happening, his coat was pulled off and he was rolled up in a bundle and tied with string in very hard knots. Anna Maria did the tying. The old rat watched her and smiled. When she had finished, they both sat staring at him with their mouths open. "Anna Maria," said the old rat, whose name was Samuel Whiskers, "Anna Maria, make me a kitten dumpling roly-poly pudding for my dinner. It requires dough and a pat of butter and a rolling pin," said Anna Maria. Samuel Whiskers got through a hole in the wainscot and went boldly down the front staircase to the dairy to get the butter. He did not see anybody. He made a second journey for the rolling pin. He pushed it in front of him with his paws, like a brewer's man trundling a barrel. He could hear Ribby and Tabitha talking, but they were busy lighting the candle to look into the chest. They did not see him. Anna Maria went down by the way of the skirting board to the kitchen to steal the dough. She borrowed a small saucer and scooped up the dough with her paws. The rats came back and set to work to make him into a dumpling. First, they smeared him with butter and then rolled him into the dough. Tom Kitten bit and spat and mewed and wriggled, and the rolling pin went roly-poly, roly-roly-poly, roly. The rats each held an end of the rolling pin to roll out Tom Kitten inside the dough. "I do not think," said Samuel Whiskers, "that it will be a good pudding. It smells of soot. This little kitten is covered in soot." Anna Maria was about to argue when all at once there began to be other sounds above them. The rasping noise of a saw and the noise of a little dog scratching and barking. The rats dropped the rolling pin and listened attentively. "We have been discovered, Anna Maria. I am afraid we will have to abandon this pudding right here." So it happened that by the time the dog named John Joyner had got the plank up, there was nobody under the floor except the rolling pin and Tom Kitten in a very dirty dumpling. But there was a strong smell of rats, and John Joyner the dog spent the rest of the morning sniffing and whining and wagging his tail and going round and round with his head in the hole like a gimlet. Then he nailed the plank down again and put his tools in his bag and came downstairs. The cat family had quite recovered. They invited him to stay for dinner. They were very happy to have found Tom again. The dumpling had been peeled off Tom and made separately into a bag pudding with fruits in it to hide the smuts. They had been obliged to put Tom Kitten into a hot bath to get the butter off him. John Joiner the dog smelt the pudding, and just as John Joiner, Tabitha, Ribby, and the 3 little kittens were about to sit down for dinner, old Samuel Whiskers and his wife were on their way out of the house with a little wheelbarrow carrying all the food they had stored up over the months. They were just about to turn and enter the barn of the farmer next door. And as soon as they entered the barn, they found a nice little corner and started to set up their home in their new spot. From that day on, there were no rats behind the walls or under the floors at Tabitha Twitchy's house. The end. And that's all for tonight. Good night, sleep tight, and don't let the bedbugs bite. Bye bye, children.